All right, we're here to talk about the Revitalization Ceremony. And this is probably the best translation from the Lakota of what has been called the Sweat Lodge Ceremony. I want to give a little history for where the term Sweat Lodge came from because it was a name given to the practice of bathing in an enclosed structure using water thrown on rocks, hot heated rocks, by the Jesuits, who called it a sweat lodge ceremony because people sweated. Now, the actual term in Lakota is Inipikaga, which means revitalization ceremony, or another translation would be breath of life ceremony. And we've been asked by many elders to stop using the term sweat lodge and to start using the term revitalization ceremony or breath of life ceremony, or in Lakota, Inipikaga, or in other languages, whatever is appropriate for that language. So, the revitalization ceremony is important because it precedes almost every other ceremony. It has also been called a purification ceremony, but I think that's less accurate than revitalization. It certainly can be an aspect of purification or ritualistic cleansing, but it's not the only aspect. So, this is what the structure looks like. And I apologize for many of my slides still say sweat lodge because they came from before we began to hear that the name had changed. So here's the essence. It's a small dome-like structure. The dome is perfect for holding in the heat. And you see that it's covered with a tarp. Back in the day, it would have been covered with skins. But now skins are really expensive, and no one can afford to cover their lodge with skins. Canadian Tire makes what they call a sweat lodge tarp, which is perfectly cut to drape over this dome-like structure. If you're in the United States, you're going to have to make your own. So, or go to Canada and buy one from Canadian Tire and bring it back. The hot stones go here in the pit in the center of the lodge. The people sit around the pit full of hot stones, and things come in and go out through the door. Now, there's many variations across North America for how this is done. Predominantly, I will focus on the Lakota style, for that is what I know. But I have been to Cree lodges, I have been to Anishinaabe lodges, I've been to Southern California lodges, and they're all a little different, but they're all pretty similar too. Generally, you don't see a lot of dream catchers hanging in the vicinity of a lodge, so this is a little unusual. This is a smaller lodge, the type that is used in Southern California, which is where this picture comes from. And in general, the Lakota style lodge stays up for a couple years, whereas this is a Chumash style lodge, which is put up for the ceremony and then taken down right away. And it's not possible to get as many people, clearly, into the Chumash style lodge as the Lakota style lodge. So maybe too many pixels here to make out, but this is a painting of a 19th century lodge in Alberta that hangs in a museum in Calgary. And you can see women are dressing the lodge. That means putting the covers on it. And in many contexts, it is considered, the women do cover the lodge. Now, that's not always true, of course. And here's a nice view inside a lodge. And this one, of course, is covered with a tarp, but on top of the tarp is the skin. And that gives it a kind of elegance that one doesn't always have. This one is surrounded by plants, which is lovely, not that common. You can see the rocks here, and these wood pegs are showing us where the rocks are, but they're not used in the ceremony. Here's a bucket of water with some herbs floating on top. The drum, the place where the people sit around the pit with the stones. And here's a photo taken in the 19th century of some Lakota men participating in this Inipi ceremony. Here's that same picture from the Cree Lodge from Alberta. And here's another view of the lodge that I showed you before. It gives you a sense for its shape in size in relation to bushes and trees. Now this time we can see where we heat the stones. So this is the fire pit, and hot rocks are heated here. There's several ways of preparing the fire. In one way, it's built with the rocks inside and then lit. In another way, a hot base of coals are produced. The rocks are placed on the coals, covered with wood in the shape of a teepee or a lodge, and then allowed to heat. There's a saying that the rocks are having their own ceremony, and so they have to be completely covered. There's a practical aspect to that too, because if you live in Maine like we do, then you're probably using river rocks, and some of them can explode a bit in the heat. And so it's nice to have a barrier between you and the exploding rocks. When I did lodge in Arizona and New Mexico, we were fortunate to have volcanic rocks, which are wonderful rocks that can be used over and over and over. Now, I should mention that I have encountered people who never use the rocks more than once. However, most of the people I know cannot afford such a luxury and use the rocks until they break up and are too small to be used again. And then one creates a small rock pile or a pile of small rocks that are eventually placed in some sacred manner or used in some good way. You can see the implements. Typically one uses a pitchfork to pull the rock out of the fire, brushes it off with a cedar bough, and then carries it into the lodge. Often there's a board placed here for the pitchfork to slide along, and there's often a man here who takes the pitchfork and guides the rock the rest of the way in. So here's some men cooling off after a ceremony. This is also a picture from the 19th century. And things really haven't changed. They probably haven't changed much in 2,000 years. Here's that same lodge I showed you before with a better view of the rocks. So this is an interesting, Peta actually means fire. And so Peta Yasin would be Fire Nation. Stone is Ia. The Stone Nation would be Iasin. And there's a song we sing to the sun, which goes Peta Uha Kishni Wa'u Welo. So it means fire without end, you are coming, meaning the dawn. So Ia is a stone, and often people sing to the stones as they come in. It's sometimes translated as grandfathers, but we've been hearing from at least one ceremonial leader, Warfield Moose, that they came up, the Lakota came up with the word grandfathers to try and capture the warmth with which the rocks hold us, as if we were their grandchildren. But it actually didn't communicate that to Europeans. And so Warfield says, let's go back to the proper translation. Let's just use language and say Inya instead of grandfather, because that wasn't traditional to call rocks grandfathers. They're Ia. So now here's an interesting book that I found that has a chapter on the lodge. The book is Spirit and Mind, Mental Health at the Intersection of Religion and Psychiatry. And it's 2017, published in Münster by LIT Verlag. And the chapter that interested me was by Thomas Sordas, who has written a number of articles in this area. And his chapter is Psychiatry and the Sweat Lodge, Therapeutic Resources for Native American Adolescents. And I think what I really appreciated was his drawing our attention to Frank, who was really one of the scholars who directed us to the task of thinking about what is psychotherapeutic outside of the confines of Western cultures. And so Frank proposed to create a truly comparative theory of psychotherapy by identifying its least common denominator in the manner in which interpersonal stress is central to affliction, in the importance of the assumptive world that underlies therapeutic practices, in the way all forms of healing address an underlying state of demoralization, in the relevance of myth and ritual across all forms of psychotherapy, and in the manner in which all these forms of healing have to do with rhetoric, hermeneutics, and the transformation of meaning. So what Sordas is saying is that these indigenous practices that we'll be exploring during this course, including the Inipikaga, are truly psychotherapeutic. And they're different from what psychotherapy looks like in contemporary Euro-American culture. But they provide all the same functions. And Sortis goes on to show how incredibly helpful the Inipikaga can be for Native American adolescents with psychiatric diagnoses. Now, there's also a wonderful paper from 2017 about a Brooklyn anthropologist's experience of the vision quest, the Hambletia, and we'll be more involved with this paper next week. But for now, I thought he had some interesting things to say because, of course, the Inipikaga precedes and is at the end of Hambletia, just as it is for Sundance, just as it is for many ceremonies. So Hogreef points out that the Inipi can be put up just about anywhere that you have water, because you need water to put on the rocks. But certain places have higher concentrations of spiritual energy. And so ideally you want to construct your Inipi structure in a place where spiritual energy is highly concentrated. And of course, for Oglala Lakota, that would be the Black Hills of South Dakota, where the 7 sacred altars are to be found. And I want to make the point that this practice of lodge, this practice of pouring water onto hot stones and sitting inside a small structure, is all over North America and Mexico and Central America. And among the Iroquoian people, archaeologists have identified both above ground, like the pictures I showed you, but also some semi-subterranean sweat lodges, sort of half underground. And I had the fortune to be in Melbourne, Australia one year, and was at an Aboriginal museum and found some drawings of what appear to be lodge-like activities, but primarily taking place underground. So there are many variations on this theme. So as you can see, the basic structure consists of bent willow poles and tied together to form a rough dome shape. And there are many ways to tie these poles. The basic structure that I was taught consists of constructing a door for each of the 4 directions, which would be 8 poles, and then putting 2 poles between each door. So that would be a total of 16 poles. And over the poles are placed skins or tarp. Actually, we like to put a star quilt on top of our lodge so that when you look up, you see the star. And then to cover with sheets, blankets, and then a tarp. The goal is to make the interior completely dark. And so the opening faces the fire pit for obvious convenient reasons. But some cultures face west, some face east, and some face south. Cree lodges face south. The Lakota Lodge faces east. The Anishinaabe Lodge, I believe, faces west. I'm not 100% sure of that. There's always a story for why that's true. a spiritual story, but also there's a practical story. And one of the things that Barbara and I discovered is that the lodge faces opposite the direction of the prevailing storm winds. So practical and spiritual combined, very typical for indigenous North America. Now, if one is lucky, one has an outside helper to manage the fire, bring in the rocks, open the door, close the door. Often we're not so lucky, and someone has to go outside from inside the lodge, bring in the rocks, and then come back into the lodge. So I wanted to point out a paper that Richard Livingston wrote on the medical risks and benefits of the sweat lodge. I wrote an editorial in that same issue of the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. And this was in response to an event that happened in Arizona that was problematic for many of us. And I will discuss this event shortly. But Livingston points out that practices similar to the North American Inipikaga existed all over the world and have been described by such diverse writers as Herodotus, Homer, and the prophet Muhammad. Hippocrates believed that fever and the conditions that produce fever are frequently curative, and cultures who use the Inipikaga have always considered it to be beneficial to health. So this would include the Russian banya, the Turkish hammam, the Jewish schwitz, and the sweat hut of various African peoples. So as of 2010, Livingston reported that there have been 4 deaths, none of them indigenous people, all of them Caucasians. And he describes these deaths. So in 1998, an Iowa man died in a makeshift sauna patterned after an Inipikaga. No cause of death was given. In 2004, an Australian man died of dehydration and heat prostration in, again, a structure patterned after an Inipikaga. And in 2002, 3 people, I believe, died in Arizona in inside a greenhouse that was covered with rubber and presented as a sweat lodge. So this was in Sedona, Arizona, and James Ray became somewhat notorious for having conducted this ceremony at a cost of $10,000 per person, which is interesting since there's emphasis in Indian country on never charging for lodge. But this event really brought home the importance of abandoning the term sweat lodge, since there was no way to prevent people from using that term, even if it had nothing to do with the traditional ceremony, which is when we began to start calling it an Inipikaga, or a revitalization ceremony. And so this event in Sedona had powerful implications for many of us, because prior to this event, I had been offering Inipikaga ceremonies, at various conferences around the country and at workshop centers without any difficulty. But suddenly it was forbidden for liability reasons. And I suppose the attorneys saw the word sweat lodge, and that was enough for them. So James Ray certainly did us all a disservice, but so did the media by not differentiating between a traditional ceremony and the insanity that James Ray created, which is, by the way, also not spiritual. So many people in the Lakota urged the media to call Ray's building a modified homemade sauna and not to deface Native American culture by calling it a sweat lodge. And some people actually sued the U.S. government for allowing it to be called a sweat lodge under an obscure treaty from the early 1800s that charged the government with protecting the dignity of Lakota culture. But unfortunately, that didn't go anywhere. So Livingston makes the very important point that no deaths have occurred in sweat lodge ceremonies conducted by traditional elders in the prescribed ceremonial manner. None. Not a one. The only reported deaths occurred in so-called New Age ceremonies conducted by non-Native people and not performed in the prescribed manner that has been practiced for as long as oral histories and ethnographies can confirm. So there is a training that takes place to become a leader. And the role of a lodge leader is to bring the people to a point, I wouldn't say suffering, to a point of challenge that is helpful for clearing the mind, but never beyond what they can handle. And Orville Looking Horse, who has much to say about these matters, believes that people who lead a Lakota lodge should Sundance for 4 years before embarking on the path. And I understand his logic because Sundance teaches you compassion. Sundance teaches you to let go of ego. And we'll talk about Sundance as we proceed in this course. But in my training, I learned how to sense the level of discomfort or comfort of everyone present and to take that into continual account. And to feel what people are feeling and not take them any further than they can go. So my personal goal in leading a lodge is that no one should ever leave. No one should ever freak out and have to go out. And unfortunately, sometimes people do get scared, even though they're doing great and have to leave. But the goal is to keep them inside. So the ceremony itself is a curative healing technique to strengthen people. And the leaders, all the leaders I know, care greatly about the people who attend and would suffer intensely if anyone came to harm. So we'll talk a little bit about how does this work? What happens in a lodge? So Raymond Bucko went looking for the real deal, the real Lakota lodge, and he didn't find it. He wrote a great book about the search, which is called the Lakota Sweat Lodge, and published by the University of Nebraska Press. And what he discovered was that every family had their own style, and they were all a little different, and they were all a bit similar, a bit alike. So I personally trained in the Black Elk family style lodge, and so I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll talk about some of the variations. So why do we have lodges? Well, we do lodges before big ceremonies, but we also do them regularly so that we have a chance to pray. Because the lodge is seen as creating a portal, creating a place for the spirits and the humans to mingle in the dark. That's why it's completely dark, so the spirits are not afraid to come in and hang out with us. And so when the door closes, we're in between worlds, so that spirit-human interaction can be facilitated. And the process begins with the lighting of the fire. And typically, tobacco is placed on the fire. And I want to talk a little bit about tobacco, because tobacco was not abused in North America before the English appeared and taught everyone how to inhale. The tobacco was considered to be the bones of First Mother east of the Mississippi, and probably west of the Mississippi too, because west of the Mississippi people were trading for tobacco to get a little tobacco. Or they were using a smoking mixture called kinshasa, which is red willow bark, or they were using kinnikinnick, which is a mixture of red willow bark, osha, bearberry, and other roots, other plants, sometimes mixed in with some tobacco from east of the Mississippi from trade. So, so the idea of the tobacco is that when the tobacco is burned, because it's the bones of First Mother, it carries the prayers to where the Creator sleeps at night so that they can be answered immediately. And in Lakota country, the white buffalo woman, who we'll talk about more as time goes on, brought the pipe, the first pipe, which was the calumet, the bowl of calumet, and the stem was a buffalo calf bone. So she brought the first pipe and showed the people how to use it and how to pray with it. And so in the lodge, in the preparation for the lodge, tobacco is often put on the fire and is used as an offering. People come to the fire and they take a handful of tobacco and they make their prayers, and then they throw the tobacco on the fire. So the rocks are heated, covered completely, regardless of the style of that one uses to do that. And when they're ready, then the people are ready to go inside the lodge. Often people make prayer ties or chanli pata while they're waiting for the stones to cook. And these are pieces of fabric, 100% cotton is what we use now, tied on a string, also completely natural, with some tobacco inside. They're sometimes translated, chanli pata is sometimes translated as tobacco tie or prayer ties or other terms such as that. But the notion is that you're making a location, you're creating a location for the spirit beings to come sit inside. And you're providing your prayers in the tobacco, but also spirit food for them. So in this style lodge, once we're ready to go in, we load the sacred pipe, or chanupa, outside the lodge, and everyone participates. So we sing a pipe loading song, and there are many, and put the tobacco or the kinnikinnick into the pipe, and then put the pipe on the altar. So we smudge, and in Lakota the word is aziliapi, meaning that we clean each other with the smoke from the sage, from dried sage. This is supposed to dispel evil from the area and from one's body. And there's a story about how that came to be, because there's a story about how everything came to be. And hopefully we'll get a number of these stories as we go. But the story is in a CD set that I did with Sounds True, which is 6 CDs, and it takes an hour to tell. So the people are aziliapi, smudged, and then they're ready to go inside. So mostly we do mixed lodges. Some ceremonies call for all men lodges and all women lodges separately from each other. Sometimes women's matters dictate women's lodges. I've certainly managed the door for a number of women's business lodges. And so there's variations on that. But in the typical teaching or family lodge, the leader goes in first, and then the leader's spouse, and then the women, and then the men, sitting around the central pit that I showed earlier, where the stones go. And the prayer ties are then hung above people's heads. 6 colors are used in Lakota style, and they are hung in their various directions, the west being black, the south being white, the north being red, the east being yellow, the sky being in the northwest being blue, and the earth being in the southeast being green. Now, Cree colors are different for the directions, same thing for Cherokee or Anishinaabe. So it's all different depending on where you are. But this is the way I was taught. There's a phrase in Lakota, friend, do it in the way you were taught. Kola leche lechon woy. And that's what we try to do. Do it in the way we were taught to show respect. But when you go to somebody else's place, you do it in the way they were taught to show respect. So, then come the rocks, and there's different ways of bringing in rocks. In the way that I was taught, ideally, we bring in rocks every time we open the door. And I say ideally because that gives you the best heat, because new hot rocks are coming in each time. There's another way of doing it where all the rocks are brought in at once. And so the first round is really hot, and the last round can kind of cool off. And once I was in a lodge in Saskatchewan where the temperature was, minus 45 outside, and it cooled off so much by the 4th round that everyone gave up and went inside to finish off. So there's some disadvantages to bringing in the rocks all at once. But when Barbara and I do lodges just by ourselves, sometimes in the dead of winter when nobody wants to come because it's too cold, we put in the rocks all at once and just stay inside the whole time, and open the door quickly and then close it for each round. And then when we're done, make a run for the house. So, and I've also seen a kind of winter compromise where if there's no doorman, if there's no firekeeper, someone will go out in the middle of the lodge and get the rest of the rocks, so as to avoid frostbite. Now, I guess one doesn't have these problems in Arizona, so that's something to think about. And so there are 4 rounds. A round lasts from the closing of the door to the opening of the door. 4 songs are sung in the first round. And when we open the door, we do not leave the lodge. We stay inside to keep the energy building. We think of it as creating a sacred vortex. So the first door in this style is for the west, for Wikashawan Sabichiacha, or the west wind, the man wearing black, the guardian of the west, many different epithets. And the idea is that it's the west. We start in the west because it's the direction for purification of the physical body, for cleansing of the physical body. It's the direction that's dedicated to working adults, the men and women who take care of the elders and children. The west is the place where the sun sets at night. In Lakota, Wayokpeatakya, direction where the sun sets at night. And sunset, of course. Autumn. The seasons are setting as you move toward short day. And from the story, from that hour-long story that I mentioned, the West came to be associated with courage, with the virtue of courage. So we start in the West for many of these reasons. And the leader then pours water on the rocks, which creates the breath of life. The steam coming off the rocks is the breath of life. And you breathe that in. Typically in the first door, we put a little bit of sage on the rocks. Gives the lodge a great odor. One wants to avoid putting too much because we don't like to smoke out all the people and create coughing. So we try and be judicious with our aromatherapy. And 4 songs are sung, as I said. They're often songs that have to do with inviting the spirits, with the 4 directions, with the sun, with the beginning of things, those kind of songs. Then we open the door and we cool off and we rest and we often, have a joke around and visit and have a good time. And when everyone's ready, we close the door again. We say, Tiopa, door. And we begin on the second round in this style with a prayer song. And then in this style, we go around the circle and each person prays however they wish. We're taught that you should think globally but pray locally so you can see your prayers come true in 4 days. And that people say things like, I echo the prayers that came before me so they don't have to repeat every single prayer from the last person. And they say things like, hear my silent prayer, which acknowledges the people you forget, because you will forget someone. And so people pray. And when all the prayers are completed, then we open the door and Mene Wichoni enters the lodge, which is the water of life. It's also medicine. Pejuta, Mene Pejuta, medicine water. And typically we've prepared it with herbs and it's been made sacred by the prayers of the people, and it goes around the circle and people drink. And there's a water honoring song that we sing while the people drink. And then again, once the water has been drank and people have received what they need, there's some visiting. There's always visiting in Lakota style ceremony. Then comes the third round, which is about, and I should mention the second round is for the North. It's for strength and endurance because we want to be strong while the people pray. And it's for the winter, for midnight, for the elders, for healing of the community body, the body of the community. And the virtue of the North is strength and endurance and wisdom. So next comes the third round. This third round is for the East, and it's about listening to the spirits, getting good guidance and direction from them. And East is, of course, the dawn. It's Weolki Ampatakya, the direction where the sun rises. And East is for infants and children and spiritual healing. They say that souls enter from the East, walk around the circle, become elders, of course, in the North. And then as they leave the world, they walk back to the East Gate of the world. And then they walk across the sky for 4 days from the East Gate to the West Gate. And they leave for spirit world from the West Gate, walking past the thunder spirits and the guardian of the west wind, and the bear who stands in the west with the west wind. So we sing 4 songs, and when we're done, we open the door, and everyone rests for a bit. And when everyone is ready, because this is the most sacred part of the ceremony, the sacred pipe, or the chanupa, enters the lodge. And the chanupa has collected all the prayers in the smoking mixture, tobacco or kinnikinnick. And so as the chanupa is smoked, then the prayers transform into spirit recognizable material, smoke, and pass upward into the heavens. There's songs are sung while the chanupa is going around, and when it's done, it's done. All of the prayers are smoked, and then it goes back on the altar outside the lodge. There is an altar, I should mention, outside the lodge, where sacred things are kept, including the chanupa. So, in the fourth round, we begin in this style with a thank you song, and then we go around the circle again, and now we celebrate. Each person has the opportunity to pray for someone they forgot, or tell a story, tell a joke, sing a song, or just talk. And when everyone is done, we sing an exit song to tell the spirits that we're done. They don't have to keep paying attention to us, and we leave the lodge. So we enter stage right, go around, and exit stage left, and complete the circle. So what are some variations to what I've explained? Well, sometimes everyone prays all at once together. Sometimes men pray in one round and women pray in another. Sometimes a quarter of the lodge prays in each of the 4 rounds. Sometimes people are chosen to pray for the whole group. Sometimes 4 songs are sung in every round. Sometimes the pipe is smoked at the end of the lodge, inside the lodge, or outside the lodge. Sometimes the leader smokes the pipe inside or outside the lodge by himself or herself before or after the lodge. Sometimes channeling happens in the 4th round, where the leader delivers messages from the spirit world. sometimes people pray while the singing is happening instead of separately. So Livingston thinks that the Finnish sauna is roughly analogous physiologically to the Inipikaga, but I don't agree. I think it's more like exercise at the gym. And Livingston notes that there's been several recorded sauna deaths. Heat stroke in an individual with Hashimoto thyroiditis, people who have drank a lot, people who were using cocaine, people with heart disease, people with epilepsy. My rule of thumb is, that's that. My rule of thumb is that if you can exercise, you're probably fine. If you can't tolerate exercise, you might have a problem. So, and we'll spend more time on the medical aspects of the lodge, but generally, if people have poorly controlled diabetes, they cannot tolerate the experience. And I've actually diagnosed diabetes from how people respond to the experience. Heart disease. So if you can't exercise without getting angina, you shouldn't go in the lodge. The heart rate is going to increase, and blood pressure response is most likely variable. Could go up, could go down, depends on the person. But significant heart disease is probably a contraindication. Now, I say probably because I have seen elders modify lodge to be ever so gentle so that people with serious heart disease can come inside and partake of the ceremony. So everything is relative. This is just saying a little bit about the structure of the lodge, again, to summarize. So the key things to remember is it's all about the heart rate. Can people tolerate rapid heart rate and changes in blood pressure? It really is impossible to dehydrate. Now, of course, in that insane thing in Arizona, which went on for hours and hours and hours without any water, people did. Or in some of the New Age sort of copycat ceremonies, people have. But we give the people medicine at the end of the second round, much as they want. Or sometimes shorter lodges, then they drink water after the whole thing is over. Our lodges, it can go anywhere from 3 to 5 hours. So our practice is water in the middle. So I don't see dehydration as a problem. And really, mostly people struggle with their fears. When I see new people coming into the lodge, their biggest enemy, so to speak, is their fear. And while I've heard stories of lodge being so hot that it's scalded people's skin and given them burns, I don't know why anyone would do that. It doesn't sound very spiritual to me. Personally, I like it nice and hot, but I'm averse to burn. Second-degree burns doesn't sound like anything prayerful to me, even though I like it. I like a good hot burn in the sense of it being hot, but because that facilitates the prayer, but not burning people's skin. Now, what do you wear inside? That's a good question. So I suspect that in times gone by, everyone wore a dress, a kilt, because that would be smart. Nowadays, women get to wear a dress, and men tend to wear shorts. Though we, in our lodge, always invite men to feel free to wear a dress, and to overcome the colonization of thinking that they always have to wear pants or shorts. Um, no one in Indian country goes naked. Doesn't happen. Though I've heard stories about New Age people, and mostly people bring towels, because if you are hot, you can cover up with your towel. Plus, you need to kind of wipe off your face before the pipe. We like to put down blankets for people to sit on. That's a really nice touch, I think. I've also seen carpet squares used, sort of carpet remnants, which is another nice touch. Um, so that's my introduction to the Inipikaga, and we'll be talking more about the medical aspects and how to advise and counsel people as we go. So that's all for tonight, and thank you for watching.